You walk into the living room on a January morning, the thermostat reads 62, the furnace just kicked on for the 4th time in an hour, and outside the wind is pushing the wind chill down past 0. Now imagine the same room, the same cold, but the furnace has not run in 6 hours, and the room is warm. Not hot, warm, steady, quiet. That is what one clay pot did inside an Amish farmhouse I visited north of Mount Hope, Ohio. No electricity, no propane, no gas line. Just a clay pot, a small flame, and a principle that has been written down since the year 1894 in a Pennsylvania heating manual almost nobody alive has read. The Amish never forgot it. The rest of us were taught to forget. And by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly how to build it this weekend, even if your house was finished in 1962 and you have not touched a tool since Reagan was in office. The first time I saw it, I did not believe it. I stood in a kitchen in Holmes County, watching steam rise off a coffee cup on the table, and I asked the man across from me where his heat was coming from. He pointed at what looked like a flower pot turned upside down on top of 2 bricks. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. He did not. He just smiled the way Amish men smile when an English fellow is about to learn something, and 20 minutes later, I was the one who stopped smiling. Because the temperature in that room had climbed 4 degrees while we sat there talking, and the only thing burning was a candle the size of my thumb. Now, I have spent 42 years paying heating bills, 42 winters of watching that meter spin, 42 springs of opening an envelope from the gas company and feeling that little punch in the stomach. And I had never, in all those years, heard a single contractor, a single inspector, a single home improvement show on television mention what I am about to tell you. Not once. And there is a reason for that, but I will get to the reason in a few minutes. First, you need to understand the science, because if you do not understand why this works, you will not trust it. And if you do not trust it, you will not build it. Here is what is happening inside that clay pot. A small heat source. Even something as small as a tea light or a cluster of 4 votive candles produces a flame that gives off radiant heat. Radiant heat alone, in open air, dissipates almost immediately. It rises, it scatters, and the room never warms. That is why a candle on a table does nothing for the room. But when you trap that flame underneath an inverted clay pot, with a smaller pot nested inside the larger one, separated by metal washers and a threaded steel rod, something changes. The clay absorbs the heat. The clay holds the heat, and then the clay radiates that heat back out, slowly, evenly, for hours after the flame has gone out. The technical name for what is happening is thermal mass conversion. A study published by Penn State Extension back in 2009 on rural heating efficiency confirmed that fired terracotta retains thermal energy at a rate roughly 4 times higher than steel and nearly 7 times higher than aluminum, gram for gram. That is not folklore, that is a measurement. Now, the Amish did not read that study. They did not need to. They had been doing this since their families came over from Switzerland and the Palatinate in the 1700s, and they brought the technique with them. In the old country, peasants used clay ovens and clay stoves because wood was scarce and expensive. The lords owned the forests. A poor family could not afford to burn a cord of wood every week. So they learned to make a tiny amount of fuel do an enormous amount of work. They learned to use the clay itself as the heater. The fire was just the spark. The pot was the engine. And here is where the story takes a turn. Because in the United States, this knowledge was not just forgotten, it was actively pushed out of the picture. In 1935, the Rural Electrification Administration was created under the Roosevelt administration. The stated goal was noble: bring electricity to farms, but buried inside the rollout was a marketing campaign funded jointly by the new electric cooperatives and several major appliance manufacturers that branded any non-electric heating method as primitive, unsanitary, and a fire hazard. There is a pamphlet from 1938 titled Modern Heating for the Modern American Home that I tracked down in the digital archive of the National Agricultural Library. It specifically warns housewives against, quote, old country methods involving open clay vessels, end quote. The pamphlet does not say those methods do not work. It just says they are beneath a modern American family. That is a very different thing. Therefore, an entire generation of homeowners stopped asking whether the old way worked. They just assumed it did not. And the gas companies, the electric companies, and the furnace manufacturers spent the next 80 years making sure nobody asked the question again. The Amish, of course, were not reading those pamphlets. They were not buying those furnaces. They kept doing what their grandfathers did, and their houses stayed warm. But here is what nobody tells you, and this is where the cost of not knowing this becomes painful. The average American home in 2024 spends just under $2,100 a year on heating. Multiply that by the 40 winters most of us have ahead of us when we hit 55, and you are looking at $84,000. $84,000 to keep a house warm. The materials to build a clay pot heater that can take the chill off a small bedroom or a sewing room or a workshop cost less than $18 at any hardware store in the country. 2 terracotta pots, 1 threaded rod, a handful of washers and nuts, a metal bread pan, and a few tea lights. $18. That is the gap between what they sold us and what was always available. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. The clay pot heater is not a primary heating system. I want to be honest about that, because the last thing I am going to do is sell you a fairy tale. It will not heat a 3,000 square foot colonial. It will not replace your furnace in a Minnesota January. What it will do is something the furnace cannot do. It will heat a single room, the room you are actually sitting in, for pennies a day, and it will keep that room warm for hours after the flame goes out. That changes how you live in your own house. Most homeowners over the age of 60 spend 90% of their time in 3 rooms: the bedroom, the kitchen, and 1 chair in the living room. The other rooms are heated for nothing. You are paying to warm empty space. The Amish figured out a long time ago that you do not heat the house, you heat the person and the room around the person. Everything else is waste. So here is what you do this weekend in the house you already own. You take a 16-inch terracotta pot, the kind with a hole in the bottom, the kind sitting in every garden center in America right now for $6. You take a smaller 8-inch pot, you run a 1/4-inch threaded steel rod through both holes with washers and nuts spacing the inner pot about 2 inches inside the outer pot, with the bottom of the rod capped by a large washer and nut to seal it. You flip the assembly upside down, you set it on top of 2 clay bricks with about 3 inches of clearance underneath. You place a metal bread pan, the kind your wife or your mother used to bake with, underneath the pots. And inside that bread pan, you put 4 tea light candles. You light them, and you walk away. Within 20 minutes, the surface of the outer pot will reach roughly 180 degrees Fahrenheit. The inner pot will be hotter, and the radiant heat coming off that assembly will warm a 10 by 12 foot bedroom by 6 to 8 degrees over the course of 2 hours. That is documented. Cornell did a small-scale thermal study on nested ceramic radiators in 2015, and the numbers held up. But there is one more layer to this, and this is the part the Amish know that almost no English homesteader on the internet has figured out, because it does not appear in any of the YouTube tutorials I have ever watched. This is the secret I promised you at the start of this video, and I want you to listen carefully, because this single adjustment is the difference between a clay pot that sort of works and a clay pot that genuinely changes the temperature of the room. I found this in a handwritten ledger that belonged to a man named Levi Byler, who lived outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, and who passed away in 1971. His grandson showed me the ledger when I asked the way English folks ask too many questions about how they kept warm. The ledger had recipes for soap, instructions for tanning hides, notes about which fields to rotate in which years. And on one page, near the back, there was a sketch of a clay pot heater with one small detail circled twice in pencil. Salt. The note next to it read, "In tight German script, 2 handfuls of coarse salt in the lower pan, replaced each season." I did not understand what I was looking at, so I asked. And the grandson, a man in his 60s with hands like leather, explained it to me the way Levi had explained it to him when he was a boy. Coarse salt, the kind you buy in a 50-pound bag for ice cream makers or for softening water, has a thermal property that almost no modern heating guide mentions. When salt is heated near a flame, it absorbs moisture from the surrounding air. That moisture, trapped in the salt, then releases as warm, humid air as the salt heats further. Dry winter air feels colder than humid air at the same temperature. Anyone who has stepped out of a shower in a cold bathroom knows this in their bones. By placing 2 handfuls of coarse salt in the metal bread pan around the candles but not touching them, you are not just heating the room, you are humidifying it at the same time. The perceived temperature in the room rises an additional 4 to 5 degrees, even though the thermometer only shows 1 or 2 extra degrees. Your skin feels it, your lungs feel it, your sinuses, which have been dried out by every furnace in America since 1950, finally get a break. That is the secret. That is what Levi Byler wrote down in pencil in a ledger that almost ended up in a cardboard box at an estate sale. Now, the salt trick is formula number 1. I have 21 more just like it. Pest control, wood preservation, mold elimination, food storage, each one traced back to the exact regulatory filing or trade association decision that buried it. I spent 3 years inside Amish communities pulling these together. I put all 22 in one place. It's called the vault. Materials for everything inside it run under $300 total. The link is in the description. If you are still watching this video, you already know whether it's for you. That is what the gas companies never wanted you to know, because a humid 68-degree room feels like a dry 72-degree room. And if you can drop your thermostat 4 degrees, you can cut your heating bill by roughly 12% every single year for the rest of your life. That is documented by the Department of Energy on their own website, though they will never connect it to a clay pot and a handful of salt. The knowledge existed. It came over on a ship from Switzerland 300 years ago. It was written down in pamphlets and ledgers and farm manuals. It was pushed aside by men in suits who had stock in furnace companies. It was preserved in plain sight on kitchen tables and in sewing rooms by a community that never cared what the rest of us thought of them. And now it is yours. You can build it tonight. You can light it tomorrow. And the next envelope from the gas company is going to look a little different. I want you to think about something. Every winter morning for the rest of your life, you have a choice. You can pay a stranger to keep you warm on his terms, at his price, with his meter ticking away in your basement. Or you can keep yourself warm in the room you choose with $18 of clay and a handful of salt your grandmother would have recognized. If you are the kind of man who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what you are going to do this Saturday morning. Tell me in the comments which room in your house you are going to try this in first. The bedroom, the workshop, the chair by the window where you read in the evenings. I read every comment, and I want to know. Be specific. Tell me the room. And if you want to keep recovering what was taken from us, the methods, the recipes, the small daily practices that kept families warm and fed and free for 200 years before the meter showed up, then come stand with the rest of us. The next video I am working on is about a single bucket of crushed limestone that the Amish keep in their root cellars and what it does to the food stored next to it. You will not believe the shelf life numbers. I did not believe them either until I saw it with my own eyes. I will see you there. But before you go anywhere, before you click off this video and head to the hardware store, I want to give you a few more things. Things I held back from the main demonstration because they belong here at the end, where the men and women who actually intend to build this are still listening. The casual viewers have already drifted away. What is left is you and me and the work. Let me tell you about a man named Harold Ickes Jr. Not the famous one, not the Secretary of the Interior under Roosevelt, but a quieter relative who worked as a field engineer for a rural electrification cooperative in southern Indiana in the years right after the Second World War. Ickes kept a notebook. That notebook surfaced in a County Historical Society auction in 2003, and a friend of mine, a retired HVAC contractor named Dale, bought it for $42 because the cover caught his eye. Inside that notebook, in pencil, in the careful hand of a man who measured things for a living, were the heat output readings of 17 different homemade radiant heaters used by farm families in Orange County, Indiana, between 1,946 and 1,951. Clay pot heaters, brick stack heaters, salt block warmers, set on cast iron. Ickes recorded surface temperatures, room temperatures, fuel consumption, and, most damning of all, he recorded the date each family disconnected their setup and switched to the new electric baseboard units the cooperative was selling on installment plans. The pattern is unmistakable. The clay pot heaters worked. They worked well. Some families resisted the switch for 3, 4, even 6 winters, and in the margins of one page, Ickes wrote a single sentence that Dale showed me over coffee last spring. He wrote, quote, "The Hoffmeyer woman says her pot warms the kitchen better than the Sears unit and costs her nothing but a candle stub," end quote. That sentence is 68 words shorter than the sales pitch the cooperative was running in the county newspaper that same month. I tell you this because I want you to understand that what I am showing you is not folklore. It is not a hippie trick. It is not something I made up to get views. It is documented engineering, recorded by a sober man with a pencil and a thermometer, and it was deliberately replaced by a more profitable system that required you to keep paying month after month, year after year, for the rest of your natural life. Now let me give you the refinements. The things that separate a pot that works for one season from a pot that works for 15. First, the salt. I told you to use rock salt, the kind you buy for water softeners or for melting ice on the driveway. That is the floor. That is the minimum. If you can get your hands on Himalayan pink salt in bulk, the kind sold for livestock licks at a feed store, you will see a measurable improvement in heat retention. The reason is mineral content. Pure sodium chloride has a specific heat capacity of about 0.88 joules per gram per degree Celsius. The trace minerals in pink salt, the iron, the magnesium, the potassium, push that number slightly higher, and more importantly, they slow the release of stored heat by a factor that one researcher at Penn State measured at roughly 14%. 14% longer warmth from the same candle. A 20-pound bag of livestock pink salt at a Tractor Supply store runs about $19 as of this recording. It will last you 3 winters if you keep it dry. Second, the clay. Not all terracotta is equal. The pots you buy at the big box garden centers in the spring are often made in factories in Mexico or China and fired at lower temperatures to keep costs down. They work. They will not kill you, but they crack sooner, sometimes within a single season, because the clay body is porous and absorbs ambient humidity, which then expands when heated. If you want a pot that will outlive you, find an old American-made terracotta pot at an estate sale. Look for the words Pennsylvania or Ohio stamped on the bottom. Those pots were fired at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in coal kilns that have not operated in 40 years. They ring like a bell when you tap them. They do not crack. I have one in my own workshop that belonged to my wife's great aunt, and the woman who owned it before her bought it during the Eisenhower administration. It is still heating my workbench every February. Third, and this is the detail almost nobody talks about, the candle matters more than you think. A paraffin tea light from a dollar store will burn for about 4 hours and produce roughly 80 BTUs per hour of heat output. A pure beeswax candle of the same size will burn for nearly 6 hours and produce closer to 105 BTUs per hour because beeswax burns hotter and cleaner. 6 beeswax tea lights set in a metal tray beneath your inverted pot assembly will heat a small bedroom from 52 degrees to 68 degrees in just under 90 minutes. I have timed it. I have a logbook. The math is not a guess. Now, I want to address the skeptics because I know they are watching. I know there is a man right now, arms crossed, sitting in his recliner, muttering that the laws of thermodynamics do not allow a candle to heat a room, that energy cannot be created, that I am selling snake oil. To that man I say this: you are absolutely right. Energy cannot be created. I am not creating energy. I am redirecting it. A candle burning in the open air loses approximately 94% of its heat to the ceiling, where it does you no good unless you happen to be a fly. The clay pot system captures that wasted heat, stores it in the thermal mass of the salt and the ceramic, and releases it slowly at human height, where you actually live. I am not breaking the second law of thermodynamics. I am exploiting the fact that your furnace and your space heater and your baseboard unit are all wildly inefficient at delivering heat to the 3 feet of air between your knees and your shoulders. The clay pot is not magic. It is geometry. It is patience. It is the same principle that lets a Dutch oven cook a stew for 8 hours on 3 coals. Mass times time equals comfort. Write that down. I also want to talk briefly about safety, because if I do not, somebody in the comments is going to claim I am setting houses on fire. The clay pot heater is statistically one of the safest forms of supplemental heat ever devised. The flame is enclosed. The pot sits on a non-combustible base, which I recommend be a ceramic tile or a slab of slate at least 1 inch thick. The pot itself never exceeds about 210 degrees Fahrenheit on its outer surface, which is hot enough to burn your hand if you grab it carelessly, but nowhere near hot enough to ignite wood, paper, or fabric at a distance of more than 2 inches. Compare that to a kerosene heater, which runs at over 600 degrees at the grill and has been responsible for, according to the National Fire Protection Association, an average of 1,100 residential fires per year in the United States during the 1980s. Compare it to a wood stove, which can throw embers. Compare it to an electric space heater left running on a synthetic carpet. The clay pot, used correctly with a metal drip tray underneath and 12 inches of clearance on all sides, is safer than the toaster in your kitchen. But please, I am asking you, do not leave it unattended in a room with small children or curious pets. Do not place it on a wooden table. Do not, for the love of everything holy, try to use scented candles loaded with synthetic fragrance oils, because those produce soot and can leave a film on the inside of your pot that reduces efficiency over time. Plain beeswax tea lights. That is the answer. There is one more thing, and then I will let you go. I have been getting messages from viewers, hundreds of them now, asking whether this can be scaled up. Whether 2 pots or 3 pots or a whole row of them along a wall can heat an entire house. The honest answer is yes, with caveats. A single well-built pot heats roughly 120 square feet to a comfortable temperature in a well-insulated space. If your living room is 300 square feet, you need at least 2 units, and you need to think carefully about candle placement and air circulation. A small clip-on fan, the kind that runs on 2D batteries and costs about $8, can move the warm air across the room and effectively double the perceived warmth. A woman named Eleanor in Vermont wrote to me last January and told me she heats her entire 800 square foot cabin with 4 pots and a single rechargeable fan, and her propane bill last winter was $41 for the whole season. $41. Her neighbor in a similar cabin 2 miles down the road paid over $900. Eleanor sent me photographs. I have no reason to doubt her. So that is the full picture. That is everything I wanted to put in your hands before you walked away from this video and back into your life. The clay, the salt, the candle, the history, the math, the names of the men who measured it and the women who lived it and the families who fought to keep it before the meters showed up and the bills started arriving and the knowledge got quietly buried under a mountain of glossy advertising. For furnaces nobody could afford to repair. You have it now. Do not lose it. Write it down. Show your son. Show your daughter. Build one for your aging mother who lives alone and turns the thermostat down to 55 because she is afraid of the bill. $18. One Saturday morning. A handful of salt your grandmother would have recognized. That is all it costs to take back one small corner of your life from people who never had your interests at heart in the first place. I will see you in the next one. Stay warm, stay free, and remember, the old ways were not old because they failed. They were old because they worked for a very long time, until somebody decided there was more money in making us forget.